The Strait of Hormuz had once again become the most dangerous flashpoint on the planet, and this time the Iranian regime had committed the miscalculation its own generals had feared for decades. In June of 2026, fast attack boats belonging to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, the parallel military force that answers directly to the supreme leader rather than to the civilian government, executed a series of aggressive maneuvers against vessels of the US, Fifth Fleet inside the strait itself, a waterway barely 53 kilometers wide that separates Iran from the Arabian Peninsula, through which approximately 21 million barrels of oil pass every single day, roughly 21% of all global liquid energy consumption, the equivalent of powering the entire economies of Japan, South Korea, and India combined for 24 hours. The American response did not come in the diplomatic form Tehran appeared to expect. It came over Qeshm, the largest island in the Persian Gulf, covering 1,491 square kilometers, a territory larger than the city of Sao Paulo, positioned less than 2 kilometers from the Iranian coastline and transformed over 2 decades into one of the most densely equipped forward operating bases in the IRGC's arsenal. Within 72 hours, American aircraft and cruise missile systems struck naval drone storage facilities, anti-ship missile depots, and command and control centers belonging to the Revolutionary Guard's naval arm on the island. The strategic message was as clear as it was brutal. Provoking inside Hormuz had ceased to be a zero-cost operation for the Iranian regime. The equation had changed. To understand why this particular escalation carried a weight that none of the dozens of previous confrontations in the strait had carried, it was necessary to step back 2 layers. The first layer was geographic. Qeshm was not just any Iranian military position, it was the centerpiece of a strategy the IRGC internally called area denial, a concept that means, in plain language, making an entire region so dangerous that no adversary can operate within it without sustaining unacceptable losses. The island functioned as a natural launch platform. From there, fast attack boats armed with anti-ship missiles could reach the strait's main navigational channel in under 15 minutes. Shahed-type suicide drones, the same drones Iran was supplying to Russia for use against Ukraine, could be unleashed in swarms against any aircraft carrier crossing the Gulf, and naval mines could be laid along commercial shipping lanes in overnight operations that were virtually undetectable. Destroying Qeshm's infrastructure was not a punitive strike. It was a surgical amputation of Iran's capacity to close Hormuz. The second layer was economic, and this is where the central paradox of the crisis began to reveal itself with devastating clarity. Iran had provoked inside Hormuz to demonstrate that it still held the power to threaten the global flow of energy, a form of strategic extortion that Tehran had wielded for 40 years as a shield against international pressure. But the true impact of this operation extended far beyond the battlefield numbers. By provoking the American response, the regime had accelerated precisely the scenario it feared most: the destruction of its own capacity for extortion. Every missile depot eliminated on Qeshm was one fewer instrument in the toolbox that allowed Iran to tell the world, "Push us, and we close the strait. Deal." And the greatest paradox of the entire crisis lay exactly here. The weapon the regime had deployed to wound its enemy was, at that very moment, destroying its own source of power. Consider what these numbers mean in practice. Pentagon estimates indicated that the strikes on Qeshm had neutralized between 60 and 70% of the IRGC's rapid launch capacity in the eastern sector of the strait, the equivalent of dismantling a naval power projection network that had taken 18 years to build in less time than it takes an American aircraft carrier to complete a transit of the Persian Gulf. The estimated cost of the American munitions expended in the operation was approximately $350 million, a substantial figure, but less than 0.1% of the annual US defense budget, while the damage inflicted on Iranian infrastructure reached, according to analysts at the International Institute for Strategic Studies in London, somewhere between $1.8 billion and $2.4 billion in destroyed military capability. The cost asymmetry had been reversed. The plan had failed. But there was a layer we had not yet touched, and it changes the nature of this analysis entirely. The impact on global energy markets was immediate and violent. Within the first 24 hours after the strikes were confirmed, the Brent crude price surged by $17 per barrel, the largest intraday move since Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. The risk premium on maritime shipping through the Persian Gulf, the additional cost insurers charge vessels transiting waters deemed dangerous, tripled within 48 hours, reaching levels not seen since the tanker war of the 1980s. For ordinary consumers, this meant that fuel prices at the pump in Tokyo, Seoul, and Mumbai would begin rising within 2 to 3 weeks. A cascade effect that transformed a localized military operation on Qeshm into direct pressure on the wallets of hundreds of millions of people across 3 continents. This is not merely a question of territory on a map. It is a question of who controls the energy arteries of the 21st century. In the shadow of this monumental strategic error, one actor was watching everything with calculated satisfaction. And here was the actor that headlines were not mentioning with the frequency the data warranted: China. Beijing was, at that moment, the single largest buyer of Iranian oil, approximately 1,300,000 barrels per day, purchased at discounts ranging between $15 and $25 below market price, through a network of intermediaries and ship-to-ship transfers that systematically circumvented American sanctions. Every time Hormuz entered crisis, 2 simultaneous movements benefited Beijing. First, the discounts Iran offered China increased because Tehran desperately needed revenue and had fewer and fewer buyers willing to defy Washington. Second, the instability in the Gulf reinforced China's strategic argument that Asia needed to diversify its energy sources away from the Middle East, which in practice meant more investment in overland pipelines and gas corridors controlled by Beijing, such as the China-Myanmar pipeline corridor and the expansion of the Power of Siberia gas pipeline with Russia. And here was what that layer revealed. The confrontation between Iran and the United States in Hormuz was not a 2-player game. It was a 3-player board where the third player, China, profited regardless of who won the hand. The board had been flipped. The historical analogy that captures this dynamic with the greatest precision is not the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, though that was the reference rushed commentators invoked in the first hours. It is the Suez Crisis of 1956, when France and the United Kingdom attacked Egypt to maintain control of the Suez Canal and discovered too late that a militarily successful operation had produced a strategic catastrophe. The United States and the Soviet Union, the 2 actors not present on the battlefield, emerged as the true beneficiaries of the crisis, redrawing the map of influence across the Middle East for the 3 decades that followed. In 2026, the structure was similar. 2 direct belligerents, Iran and the United States, trading blows while the actor that stood to profit most from prolonged instability watched and expanded its influence without firing a single shot. Consider what this reveals about the dynamics of the conflict. Inside the IRGC's Operational Command Center in Tehran, Rear Admiral Alireza Tangsiri, commander of the Revolutionary Guard's naval force, a veteran of Gulf patrols since the 1990s, recognizable by his always immaculate uniform and the public rhetoric that alternated between apocalyptic threats and Quranic verse, was confronting the concrete outcome of the provocation his subordinates had executed. This man is not the emotional protagonist of this analysis. He is the investigative coordinate, pointing to what the Iranian naval power projection system had become. A provocation machine that functioned perfectly in low-escalation scenarios, but proved catastrophically brittle the moment its adversary chose to respond with real force. The IRGC's fast attack boats, effective for harassing unarmed oil tankers and generating headlines, possessed no defensive capability whatsoever against Tomahawk cruise missiles launched from destroyers hundreds of kilometers away. And so we arrive at the question no analyst was answering with sufficient clarity. The American strikes on Qeshm had resolved the immediate problem. Provocations inside the strait ceased in the weeks that followed, and the IRGC pulled its remaining fast attack boats back to mainland ports, outside the immediate reach of American naval firepower. But the secondary paradox, the second layer of the double paradox, was already in motion. By destroying Iran's conventional capacity to threaten Hormuz, the United States had eliminated the option that, however dangerous, was the most visible and therefore the most deterrable. The IRGC would not disappear, it would adapt. And that adaptation, according to analysts at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, was pointing in directions far harder to contain. Intelligent naval mines deployed by unmanned submersibles, cyber attacks against the navigation systems of oil tankers, and the activation of Hezbollah and Houthi operational cells to strike Saudi and Emirati energy infrastructure as a form of indirect retaliation. The era of cheap, feared conventional attacks was closed forever. The era of cheap, intelligent, and lethal asymmetric defense had officially begun. Step back and look at the complete picture. The cost of the crisis for the Iranian economy was measurable and devastating. Iranian oil exports, which had reached, with the assistance of Chinese and Indian buyers, approximately 1,700,000 barrels per day in the months before the provocation, fell to roughly 900,000 barrels per day in the weeks following the strikes, as tankers avoided proximity to Qeshm and insurers refused coverage for cargoes originating from Iranian Gulf terminals. With crude being sold at even steeper discounts to the few buyers willing to assume the risk, the regime's daily revenue fell from approximately $135 million to less than $60 million, a loss of $75 million per day, the equivalent of burning through the entire annual budget of the public hospital system of a city the size of Belo Horizonte every 9 days. Every additional day was one more day of pressure on the countries that most depended on that resource, countries that would, in turn, generate pressure on Washington that the White House could not ignore indefinitely. And here was what that detail changed. The Iranian provocation inside Hormuz, conceived as a show of force to pressure the United States into easing sanctions and returning to the nuclear negotiating table, had produced the exact opposite result. Greater military destruction, deeper economic isolation, greater dependence on Beijing as the buyer of last resort, and consequently, a greater loss of energy sovereignty to China. Iran had played its most powerful card and lost not just the hand, but part of the deck. What the strikes on Qeshm established was not merely a new threshold for American military response in the Persian Gulf. It was the definitive end of the era in which Iranian provocations inside Hormuz could be treated as routine events manageable through diplomacy. The new paradigm was binary and irreversible. Any direct threat to the flow of energy through the strait would be answered with kinetic force against the infrastructure sustaining that threat. The strategic question that remained open, and that would define the months ahead, was whether Tehran would respond with the asymmetric retaliation analysts feared, activating regional proxies against Saudi Arabia and the Emirates, or whether the regime would calculate that it had already lost enough and seek, for the first time in decades, a genuine de-escalation with Washington, knowing that China, its principal buyer and supposed ally, would not lift a finger to defend it. The strait remained open. The question was, for how long and at what price? If this analysis has changed how you understand what is happening in the Persian Gulf, subscribe to the channel and share this video with anyone following the crisis in the Middle East, because the next chapter of this story may redraw the energy map of the planet.